Hello and welcome. Make yourself comfortable and prepare yourself to learn. In this video, we're going to discuss the domain and range of a function along with some examples to aid your understanding. It's going to be simple. So let's get started. Okay, so consider this arbitrary function, f of x. And now let's ask the question, what is domain and range? What does the domain and what does the range tell us about a function? Well, we could think of it as if the domain and range are telling us, or the domain and range has to do with where the function exists, or even where the function is allowed to be, or even where the function works. These are just a couple of analogies. Now, what exactly do the domain and range focus on? The domain focuses on the inputs, the x's, the x values, for what x values a function can exist. The range has to do with the corresponding values, the outputs, the y values, where the function exists in terms of outputs. Now consider this xy plane. Now graphically, for the domain, we would have to look at the x values, which is on the x-axis. So again, for what values on the x-axis does the function exist or allowed to be? And then the corresponding outputs on the y-axis would tell us the range, where the function exists in terms of the output. Okay, now let's see how all this plays out by using an example. We're going to consider a fairly simple example here, the quadratic function, y is equal to x squared. And then let's ask the question, where does this function exist? Where is it allowed to be in? Basically, what's the domain and what's the range? All right, let's return to how we ended up thinking of the domain and range. We said the domain, for that, we have to look at the x values, the inputs, here on the x-axis. And for the range, we'll have to look at the y values, the outputs. So let's do that, starting with the domain. Now, where is this function allowed to be? Is there anywhere it can't be? Let's try plugging in. Now, let's say we plug in 2. Y is equal to 2 squared. We're just plugging in. We would get 4. Let's try 0. 0 squared. We would get 0. Let's try negative 50 squared. We would get 2,500. You could even try decimals. Anything would work, really. So the point here is to say that the function can exist for all x values. So the domain is all x values. What's a more formal way of saying that? We could say all real numbers. We found it. The domain is all real numbers. Because for all real numbers, there is a corresponding output. So there's no restriction, nothing weird going on. So the domain is all real numbers. Now, how about the range? Well, for that, let's look at this y-axis over here. Okay, so the y-axis. Where is the function in terms of the outputs? Well, we notice these are, as indicated by these arrows, the function is going towards, sort of going towards infinity here, going up and up and up. Then if we look down here, it's not going down. See, it stops here. So we could say that the range is all, now this is a very informal way to write this, all y values greater than 0. Why? Because we see that starting from this y value over here, which is just 0, and greater than that, the function continues and exists. What's a more mathematical way to write all this? Well, for the domain, we could say x belongs to the real numbers. This symbol here is belongs. This symbol here is the set of real numbers. And x is just saying, for any x value that belongs to the real numbers, the function would exist. And so this is the domain. Now the range, we would write instead, y is greater than or equal to 0. So for the y values that are greater than or equal to 0, we say equal to 0 because it's starting there definitely. All right, because it is a point, part of the function. So for any y value greater than 0, the function exists. Now you can find other examples in the examples playlist. And in regards to the domain, there are many ways of writing it mathematically. This is not the single way. And that's for the following video. Alright, so thank you for watching today's video, and more importantly, I really hope you learned about the domain and range of a function. Just focus on those analogies that the domain has to do where the function can exist in terms of x values, so for what x values the function can exist. And the range, you just look at the y-axis. You see how the function or where it exists in terms of the y-axis and outputs. Just think of it that way and simplify the idea. You can find trickier examples in the examples playlist, and I'll see you in the next video. Find my blog below for notes on this topic.